So I think we'll leave the doors open for a while, but I think we're more or less ready to get started. We want to keep it a bit more conversational if we can, and what we tried to do is bring this panel and the one immediately after a little bit closer together. We're talking about CollectionSpace first, and then about the American Art Collaborative next, kind of starting with a specific piece of software, specific implementation, and then how a group of institutions might be able to use something like this. Really quickly, before we get too far into it, how many of you have any experience using CollectionSpace? So a handful of people. How many know of CollectionSpace before coming to the session? All right. And most of the people in the room have some sort of direct contact with their institution's data, I'm guessing? Show of hands? Yeah. Okay. Oh, hi, I'm Peter. I'm from the Google Cultural Institute. We'll be giving a information session tomorrow. I think it's at 1 o'clock in the room right across from the exhibitors hall. And we also have an exhibit set up over there. But yeah, I'll be around in case anybody doesn't know what the Cultural Institute is too. We'll be starting with Richard. He'll be talking about CollectionSpace. We'll have the speakers introduce themselves really briefly and then hopefully be able to have a conversation. If there are any questions, I think through the talk would be fine.
Yeah.
You don't mind being interrupted?
No, that's fine.
Okay. So if there are any questions, what'll probably happen, if you can ask the question, I'll repeat it for the recording, and then we'll let the speakers answer.
Yeah, interrupt me if I'm going over now.
Great. So to start off, Richard from CollectionSpace.
Hi, everyone. My name's Richard Millet. I'm the technical lead for CollectionSpace. I'm going to give you a talk today about a proposed project prototype that we submitted to IMLS earlier this year. So the project, we titled it Embracing CollectionSpace with Love. CollectionSpace, I'm going to give, this is kind of an overview of what I'm going to be talking about. So CollectionSpace, I'll give a quick, hopefully less than 10-minute talk about CollectionSpace, just to give you some background. Then I'll talk quickly about the proposal we made, and then I'll briefly describe some of the challenges, both process-oriented challenges and technical challenges that we expect to hit during this project. So CollectionSpace, real quickly. First, I want to start, it's more than software. It is software, but it's more than software. We consider ourselves a really dynamic community, an innovative platform for managing your collections and managing your data around your collections and metadata. And we're also a free and open source content collection management system, not content management system. This is a really important part of CollectionSpace. You know, we feel like the community, the greater community, museum community, needs an alternative to, it needs to have an open source, several open source projects, and we think CollectionSpace is one of those good alternatives. CollectionSpace recently moved into an organizational home underneath Lyrasis. Lyrasis is a nonprofit that's been supporting libraries, archives, and museums for decades now. And as part of Lyrasis, the organizational home of CollectionSpace, of which I'm a part, we serve as the primary steward of the software. We support the CollectionSpace user and developer communities, and we provide support to the CollectionSpace service providers. We also help develop strategic partnerships with related software initiatives. We have 2 full-time staff, myself as technical lead, and Megan Forbes, who's acting as our program manager right now. CollectionSpace, in addition to being an open community, everyone's invited, can participate. We also are member-driven. So members in CollectionSpace community help contribute to our vision, the vision of supporting, again, an open and free collection management system that any museum can adopt and use. Members also actively and openly participate in the development, deployment, and governance of the software, as well as the community. And members commit professionally, financially, and intellectually to the project. Again, you'll see highlighted red throughout all my slides, so we want to make the emphasis, this is an open project, open to anyone, open to all of you, open to the community. So the software part of CollectionSpace, again, an open, freely available collection management platform. It's licensed under the ECL2. It's built off a back-end native RESTful API, very powerful. You can use that to automate things, to build your own front end, to basically do anything you want. It's a very powerful, useful RESTful API. And the software is essentially derived or based on the Spectrum standard from the Collection Trust Foundation. So the software was designed from the beginning to be very flexible. One of the reasons for that is the community we're trying to serve consists of a lot of different domains. Some of the existing deployments of CollectionSpace right now include collections from anthropology, herbaria, fine art, local history, botanical gardens, and cultural heritage. Again, each of these deployments, if you look at them, they're slightly different. They look more suited toward those particular domains. And this, again, was one of the design goals originally from CollectionSpace. So the proposal that we put forward about a year ago was to establish an open and collaborative effort under the umbrella of Lyrasis to design and implement a prototype extension to CollectionSpace for integrating the Getty Research Institute's AAT as linked open data. Why linked open data? This is beyond the scope of my talk. I think you've already had several talks at MCN here today or yesterday about linked open data. But it can help improve a collection's metadata, it can enhance a collection's knowledge base, and it can support global open research efforts. So it's a way of exposing your collection's data, integrating with other collection data like Getty's AAT, and it's a bigger part of our mission as CollectionSpace, again, working in this open research, open collaborative community effort. So the project has two major types of goals. We had some aspirational goals for the project and some more utilitarian goals. Some of the aspirational goals were to inspire the greater CollectionSpace community to pursue more development efforts around linked open data. We see a lot of potential in this effort. A lot of an important partner of CollectionSpace is UC Berkeley, and a lot of the research museums are there are very supportive of linked open data, and there's a lot of brilliant people there that want access to these collections data. And we think linked open data is a way to expose that stuff. And another aspirational goal is just to further the option of linked open data in all managed collections, whether or not it's CollectionSpace or not. We want to help grow that web of knowledge that's out there in all our collections. Some of the utilitarian goals, one obviously is to deliver a working proof of concept to the CollectionSpace community that we can link to open data, we can link to the AAT. We want to reveal those critical hiding functional specifications. You start with a broad idea like let's use the AAT, let's have linked open data. But when it gets down to actually delivering and building those products, a lot of those real functional specifications don't surface until you've got a prototype that people have in their hands and they're working with those things. Related to that, we wanted to discover a technical model for future linked open data development. Again, we're thinking a prototype is the best way to start to expose what a model is going to look like. Also, we wanted to uncover some unexpected technical roadblocks and obstacles. And again, this is just as functional specifications get drawn out by working prototypes, technical roadblocks and issues and usability also surfaces when you have a prototype. And then a final utilitarian goal would be to provide real-world working feedback to the AAT as they continue to open up data. I think the AAT's now been out since February of 2014, so I think we're still early on and we can still provide hopefully some meaningful and useful feedback. Okay, so CollectionSpace and vocabularies. One of the goals from the beginning for CollectionSpace was to have strong support for controlled vocabularies. If you were to open up the UI of CollectionSpace right now and look at, for example, a cataloging page or a procedural record page, you would see on the right-hand side a list of any controlled terms or that were referenced in those cataloging or procedural records. And those are essentially hot-linked, web-linked, hyperlinked references to the actual full records of those terms. So again, looking at a cataloging page on the right-hand side, you'd see a list of all the terms referenced in that cataloging page. You could click on any of those terms and bring up the full record for those controlled terms. And once the full record for that controlled term is up, on the right-hand side again, you would see all the objects that reference that term. So this is a really nice, powerful feature that's been in there in the beginning, and that people have, that the people using the collections have really enjoyed. Now, in the back end, we support all of this functionality with something we call ref names. So ref names are essentially URIs or URNs to these controlled terms. At the bottom of the slide here is an example of a ref name we use for a specific vocabulary. Not a term, but the vocabulary, the containing parent of the vocabulary term. Okay, URIs, URNs. I mentioned ref names are URNs, so I'm going to do a quick lightning talk of these terms that you probably have seen throughout any discussion of a linked open data talk. So a URI is a uniform resource identifier. It's essentially a set of characters or a string of characters that are used to identify or locate a resource. Resource, again, a very abstract term, and intentionally abstract. So there's two types of URIs out there. There's URLs and there's URNs, both of which are URIs. So a URL is probably the most familiar one out there. You've all seen this. It's a way to identify the location of a resource. A popular example, obviously, are web links, are classic examples of URLs. URN is a uniform resource name. A URN is a way to identify a resource by name. These are less common. You don't see them very often unless, again, you're part of the linked open data world, or you happen to have, for example, this is an example of at the bottom here, an ISBN number as a URN. So again, CollectionSpace uses these things called ref names. Ref names are URNs. I'll break down a little bit about the components of a URN. The example there at the top is this big long string, but at the beginning you can see at the beginning of this ref name is the prefix URN. And this denotes to CollectionSpace that this ref name is an instance of a URN. Right below that, and to the right of that prefix, is a namespace identifier. The namespace identifier helps qualify and scopes the remaining part of the ref name, which is the namespace specific identifier, the NSS. And this is data that's unique to a particular ref name in CollectionSpace. So what's the purpose of using ref names? So ref names make it possible to store the structured data, in plain text. A lot of the fields in CollectionSpace you can look at, if you looked at them in the database in the back end, they look like just strings, right? But there's this structured URN in there that gives us a lot of semantic meaning for those fields, for those strings. It provides our back ends and our services some agnostic data that's independent of how we implement this support for vocabulary terms in CollectionSpace. And finally, it makes those values, those ref names, it gives their contextual metadata, it makes it portable, so we can do things like bring data in, import and export data out of CollectionSpace. So CollectionSpace uses URNs and Getty's AA terms are URNs. So is this a coincidence? No, not really. There's a method to this madness, and URNs happen just to make a very good way to describe something like a controlled term. For example, CollectionSpace ref names. This is just a possible mapping of an AAT term to a CollectionSpace backend ref name. You can kind of see the similarities there, and it's possible this might be one way we represent an AA term in CollectionSpace. Okay, so the slide everyone's been waiting for, if you're especially the software engineers. You want to see the details, right? Implementation details. To be continued. So I said earlier that we had applied for a grant, an IMLS grant, Sparks grant, to do this work on this proposal. We didn't get awarded the grant. but we still think this proposal is a good idea, so we're leaving it open. We're going to try to find new funding, or we're going to try to find additional partners that might want to work with us. But that said, we think we've thought about, again, this proposal, and we see some challenges to it. And I've categorized it as two types of challenges. One is a process challenge, and another is am I doing okay?
You're fine.
Another is a technical challenge. I'll go over those real quickly. So the process challenge, this is similar to everything we've experienced in CollectionSpace from the beginning. It's always been an open collaborative effort where we've had to work with a lot of partners from all over the world, different time zones. So keeping a process on a prototype like this open and keeping it collaborative is always a challenge, and we think we're well equipped with our experience to make that happen. Getting feedback is also real tough. For a project that doesn't even in the prototype stage, getting feedback from the community is always tough because people want to see stuff in their hands before they can kind of give what they feel like is meaningful feedback. So that's a big challenge for us as well. And then maintaining scope is also a challenge. We don't want to promise the world. We want to start building something in an iterative, agile, small step at a time process. Some technical challenges when we start to implement this is deciding what to cache. What AAT database or linked open data do we want to keep locally to keep on a local museum basis, and deciding what data persists versus caching, deciding how we're going to integrate all this data from the Getty AAT into an individual CollectionSpace deployment, and how that integrates into things like searching and that a lot of our customers have enjoyed and continue to use a lot. And then finally deciding what to expose as linked open data. Linked open data is a two-way road. So Getty shares the AAT, and we want to make it at least possible for our implementers and deployers of CollectionSpace to share stuff back out on the web. So helping them decide what and how to expose their data as linked open data. So that's it. So basically I gave you a quick talk about, a lightning talk about CollectionSpace, a description of the proposal and what we want to do, some of the challenges that we're expecting, and again, letting you know that this is again an open proposal right now. It's not funded, and we hope to get it funded and start working on it pretty soon. So with that, if you want to ask me questions now, that's fine. We can do it afterwards.
I've got a couple that I'd like, but I'd like to see if anyone else has questions right away. So one thing, you mentioned open quite a few times, and I think it's a great thing to strive for, but given that it's under Lyrasis, what exactly is the governance model for the open kind of collaborative community?
Right.
And who's going to be driving development?
Right. So CollectionSpace is still an independent, you could in some ways say it's an independent organization. We have a separate governance model. There's a leadership working group, there's a technical working group, and then there's a functional working group. And it consists of all members and current deployers and implementers of CollectionSpace. So they kind of govern what happens. Lyrasis wants to be also a partner with CollectionSpace, in addition to providing, as an organizational home, you know, HR, networking, computers, infrastructure.
Sure.
But we see a lot of synergy between Lyrasis as a service provider to libraries, archives, and museums, as a way for them to be an important strategic partner for CollectionSpace.
So actually with the library and archives component, you mentioned Spectrum was your data standard, or the one that you're building towards. That's a bit of a surprise. I mean, and there's a few others to choose from. What drove you to Spectrum?
So Spectrum was a part of an early discussion way back in 2008. And I think they adopted it, they liked it because it was not a very strict standard. It was more of a documentation standard for museums. So it was basically a lot of policy and procedures to follow.
Mm-hmm.
And we wanted to make sure it was a model that worked well for a lot of different museums. So it's a guideline for what was developed in CollectionSpace and not a strict adherence.
And do you think that there would be more of a push to include other library and archival content there? I mean, in the sense that Spectrum still is kind of set up for museums use, but
Right.
again, being under Lyrasis and having
Yeah.
that potential remit.
So in addition to CollectionSpace being under LYRIS's umbrella, ArchiveSpace is also
Yeah.
part of that. And we've started working and plan on working more closely with ArchiveSpace to align not only our technical platforms, but our strategic platforms as well. So I would expect over the years you're going to see a lot more possible integration between ArchiveSpace and CollectionSpace and making them work together.
And one last question, if nobody else wants to jump in, about branching in terms of software.
Mhm.
So if someone did want to have their own kind of bespoke implementation or wanted to do remediation of metadata in a different way or something like that, how do you handle that in terms of where does it fork off? And then if you wanted to bring some of that code back in,
Right.
how does that work?
Yeah. So CollectionSpace, again, that's why I always try to make an emphasis as a community. It's open source right now, so you could go up to GitHub, take it, fork it, and do whatever you want with it. But we try to include everyone and make them realize it's part of a community. That the software is going to get better if we work together. At the same time, as I was describing earlier, it works for herbaria, botanical gardens, anthropology museums, fine art museums, and the software is designed so that you can customize it, make your own changes, contribute back if you want. If you think you've got a good extension for an anthropology museum, contribute it back to the community, and that becomes part of the standard for that, what we call community profile. So over time, these profiles start to develop and become enriched as more and more adopters use those.
So that's the mechanism in terms of those profiles. Either elaborating an existing one or starting a fresh one would be one of the easiest ways to kind of customize
Exactly.
an implementation. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. Yes.
You mentioned that as part of what you wanted to do with the prototyping, introducing the idea of some technical models that could be shared around linked open data. Can
Right.
you just open that up a bit more? What does a technical model mean in that regard?
Right. Well, I would love to give you a better answer, but part of that was the work.
Oh, yeah, of course. Question about technical models for linked open data and how CollectionSpace might think about that.
Right. So part of the work and outcome of this proposal was to kind of have that discussion with the greater community. I mean, without going into details of things like triple stores and Sparkle and exposing what kind of APIs to expose to do all that. This was my hope and aspiration for this, was to have that discussion.
So a well-placed punt.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
It wasn't the aspiration.
Yeah.
It was, exactly.
All right. In that case, I think Neal, Shane, Kate, who's going to take off first to talk about the American Art Collaborative?
I think I'm going to start.
All right.
Just let you drive if you're okay with
Yeah,
that.
that's cool.
Great. So while he's getting that set up, my name is Shane Richey. I'm the manager of digital media at Crystal Bridges Museum down in Bentonville, Arkansas. Okay, here we go. So I'm just going to give you guys kind of a brief introduction and kind of a overview of what the American Art Collaborative is, and kind of where we came from and why we're here. So this whole thing started back around 2011 or so. A number of people who are still involved with the American Art Collaborative were kind of looking at this growing linked open data cloud, which this is a more recent model of it that you see on the screen, and realize that while there was some nodes in there that represented the cultural, kind of the whole cultural heritage world, there weren't many, and there was room for a lot more. And they kind of saw this as an opportunity. So a group, back one more, wait, slow down there, okay. A group, Information Sciences Institute from USC, who I will refer to as ISI from going forward, and Eleanor Fink kind of got together and started hatching this plan to start working on converting and publishing some data. So they kind of brought the Smithsonian American Art Museum on board, converted a large body of their data, published it, and got it online. It was up and working. They realized very quickly, though, that though they had data and it was open, and technically it was linkable, that it really would kind of work better, and it would be much happier if they kind of had some friends to kind of go along with it and kind of start cross-linking with some other collections. So at that point, they hatched this plan, all right, to kind of start pulling together a group of other museums to kind of start talking about the feasibility of kind of building this art, American art specifically, linked open data cloud. So a group of museums started getting together, meeting, talking about some goals and some ideas and what we might be able to do with it. We started kind of talking, at this point we're still kind of a loose grouping, until late 2013 we pursued a grant to kind of kick off planning in earnest. And we got a Mellon planning grant in late 2013. And really the goal with that was to kind of really build kind of a critical mass of linked open data to get it out there and would allow us to kind of play with it, see what we could do with it, see how much interest it could build for us, as well as kind of build a set of standards. And we've been talking about best practice from the very beginning of this project, so that we can kind of repeat this project for other institutions once we kind of completed it. So, okay, next one. So, along with that grant, we kind of solidified the American Art Collaborative. We are currently 13 museums. We really looked for kind of diversity among the museums. So we had some university museums, we had some private, some public, a couple of libraries, a lot in larger cities and a number in smaller markets. So we could really kind of play around, or we have a chance to kind of see how this plan would fit for kind of across the board with a number of different types of collections. A lot of it was kind of, we kind of built a lot of interest in it through word of mouth, a lot of personal connections among museums, until we ended up with a group of 13 that you see on the screen right now. At that point, Crystal Bridges was still just a couple of years old, and it was really attractive to us because our collection is new, is very new, and it was, while it was online, we hadn't really put it online with any definite purpose. We were still trying to figure out what we wanted to do and how we wanted to deal with it. So the opportunity to really kind of jump in and be involved with the Linked Open Data project from the very beginning of that to us was perfect timing, and it's really been helpful to us for the last couple of years. Okay. So here we are, like I said, 13 museums. Right now, the goal is for us to kind of learn together, to be a collaborative, kind of help each other problem solve as we're going through this. One of the things that's really been interesting, at least from my perspective, or most useful, is I've depended on this group of 13 museums more for figuring out how to talk about linked open data in this project to the leadership of the museum more than anything else. What words have worked for y'all? What's the best way to explain it? So, yeah, like I was saying earlier, right now we're working on building that critical mass of linked open data to kind of explore its value. Okay, and with that, I will pass it over to Neal.
Great, thanks, Shane. Good afternoon. I'm Neal Johnson. I've spent 22 years developing technology solutions at the National Gallery of Art, and yes, sorry, question.
Can you put the mic closer, please?
Yeah, sure. A couple of decades at the National Gallery of Art, and now working with my partner Dwayne Degler from Design for Context, and it was our great fortune to become involved with the project as facilitators and to help with some of the strategic portion of the project. And so I'm going to just take a couple slides here in some minutes to talk about that planning grant process that was funded by the Mellon and discuss some of the key outcomes. I can't be complete about that. We just don't have enough time today. There's plenty more to talk about. So come see us if you want to know all the gory details. First of all, it was Eleanor's vision to put together a diverse partnership, as Shane mentioned. She wanted curators, registrars, educators, archivists, technologists. Everyone was going to be invited to the party, and as a result, it became clear that we wanted to make sure that everybody had a basic level of understanding, a sort of platform to stand on, in terms of their understanding at a base level of what linked data is, what its value propositions are, What are the standards around it? What are the toolkits such as they stand today as a way to help everybody come together over 2 days of facilitated group ideation and strategy that would hopefully prioritize the group's goals, create a sense of community and commitment around the partnership. And as a lead up to those 2 days of facilitation, there was an assemblage of a group of advisors. There were specialists in linked data and the CRM ontology, AAAF gurus, toolkit builders, the works. And through a bunch of education sessions, prepared everyone to get together for these 2 days and build what turned out to be a remarkable kind of consensus. Even at the end of 2 days, there was still a lot of love in the room and a sense that the following were really key strategic and tactical issues for the group to be paying attention to as it moved forward. First of all, there was absolute commitment to the idea that the partnership itself was critical to success. There just simply wasn't any way any one or even 2 or maybe 3 of these partners could come together and do what we thought the potential the entire collaborative had to achieve anything like this. Needed to lean on each other, needed to aggregate a certain amount of linked data to be valuable, so on and so forth. But the other aspect of this was that a recognition, both through the examples that were out there in the wild and the discussions that the group was having amongst itself, that you needed technologists and subject matter experts, the curators, registrars, educators, archivists, to collaborate. They have to be sitting at the same table through this entire process. As you're thinking about how to migrate data, as you're transforming to linked data, as you're designing the interfaces that'll let you access and use the linked data, there needed to be this collaboration up and down the chain. And as a result of that kind of a conversation, you begin to realize that the timeline, it begins to solidify in front of you, and it's a long road. This is going to take some time. It's a decidedly technical exercise. The close collaboration and coordination between everybody that's involved is critical, and so there's going to be a certain amount of overhead and planning, particularly when you're talking about a group of people who are essentially dedicating their time to this, right? This is nobody's primary job. There was a careful effort to generate memorandums of understanding from all the partners so that you could get a commitment from upper management, from the director level, to say we're going to commit a certain amount of time and these people to this effort. But there's a recognition that we just have to take reasonably sized bites as you phase the project and continue to get grant funding so that you can keep people engaged, not drive them away by the level of the effort, but continue to show timely results that continually show value over time. And as a result, there was a need to define what those demonstration projects look like. So if you're going to take your first bite, what were we going to do in order to achieve some value there and show some results? So let's talk at a little bit lower level about what that might look like. There were 38 use cases generated in the course of those 2 days. The partners took a very close look at them and collaboratively prioritized them. And what boiled down was essentially that if we thought there was a certain size bite that could be chewed, and that could be reasonably filled with an exercise that both converts a critical mass of collection data from all the partners, but also the design and development of some form of browsable interface that provides discovery across that, right? It's one thing to produce the data, but then so what? What am I going to do with it? If I can't discover across it in valuable and useful ways, the sense was that we needed to develop an interface to do that. And that interface would have to provide the kind of flexibility and potentially novelty in terms of the way the user interacts with that data and get some use out of it. The interfaces required, from our perspective, is probably not entirely fully understood and discovered yet in terms of requirements. There's some serious design thinking and effort going to be required to fully realize the potential that we want to get out of that. And the follow-on grant, the matching grant to the IMLS funds, which we hope is pending, will actually fund that second effort. So convert the data with the IMLS grant and then turn to the second grant to build the application that'll give you some form of interface to it. The next question was, what defines a critical mass of American art linked open data? We don't have an exact count yet, but anecdotally, I've heard that we'll probably at the end of the day have upwards of 100,000 object records converted. To be determined how many triples that results into. We'll see how much of the data actually gets converted, or how broadly it does. So you'll certainly have that in hand, and you'll discover via that interface that gets developed whether that provides the kind of added value that we suspect is there from the linked data. But the other avenue here is how heterogeneous does this collection of data need to be in order to sort of minimally demonstrate value. So it's not just about volume, it could potentially be about heterogeneity. You know, as everyone was thinking and talking about all the different kinds of museum information that's important to scholarly effort, it doesn't begin and end with collection information. We're talking about images, curatorial records and files, archives, conservation data, so on and so forth. It's a very long list. But there was an understanding that part of that first bite would mean probably just focusing on the collection data, for which there is a sort of consistent record and a set of tools that we could do that conversion. But there's definitely an eye on the prize of saying that these other types of data need to be considered and brought into the sphere of influence as soon as possible. Next, real quickly, just to finish up here, a couple of key challenges that were recognized that'll have to be dealt with outside of the partnership. So there's this inherent management challenge around the URL creation and the management of those URLs, and so there's a plan to add some scope to build a tool that will be an adjunct to the rest of the toolkit that will help convert the data, that will allow institutions to do that more conveniently than if they had to do it by hand. Secondly, there's a general recognition in cultural heritage and the use of linked data that one of the key hurdles is this idea of harmonization or reconciliation. So, for example, several of these museums are going to be collecting art by the same artist, but the resolution that the artist that Shane is talking about and the artist that Kate is talking about are the same person, that requires some sort of linking that connects these two things together and recognizes that they're the same person. And of course, you can use third-party authorities like the Getty ULAN or the AAT or VIOF or something to disambiguate some of those entities. But what is recognized is that none of those third parties, ULAN or VIOF or any of the others, are complete enough to meet 100% of the need to do this kind of harmonization and reconciliation. And so there's going to be some handwork required here. It's worth noting that the Mellon thought highly enough of this as a challenge that it convened a panel of experts last December to think about the problem, and there's a report available through their site written by Rob Sanderson, and it's very instructive, and it helps to sort of paint a path forward for how we're going to deal with this problem. And then there's the perennial issue of the question of openness. Obviously, there's, linked open data is the goal here, but this adds a political and legal dimension that just has to be dealt with. And so the strategic approach to that was to start the conversation about how you're going to determine the licenses under which you'll publish data and images, to get that started as soon as possible, and that's underway presently. All right, so that's the recap, and I'll be happy to turn it back to Shane.
Okay. So, where is the American Art Collaborative kind of going from here? Like I was saying earlier, we're currently working on collecting, converting, and preparing to publish our data online into that linked data cloud that we were looking at earlier. We're also, as we're doing this, we're keeping an eye kind of open towards kind of integrating kind of new tools and new standards to make sure that what we're doing is current and it's relevant. For instance, the IIIF platform that will allow us to integrate images a little bit better into the linked open data world. There's the Karma tool that ISI works on that kind of helps us with the converting and linking. The various naming authorities that are in use, making sure that like I said, what we're doing kind of takes advantage of those and are based on that, so that it kind of works in the same environment. The group did receive an IMLS grant just a few months ago. We're currently looking to attain the matching grant for that to start working on developing some applications to take advantage of this linked open data once we have it converted and published. And a couple examples of that would be a browsing app, and this will be just kind of a first run at building an application that would allow you to to browse, search, kind of play with the data a little bit easier than just looking at it in the spreadsheets. That's really to kind of demonstrate the flexibility and the power of the linked open data. There's also a link curation tool that that's currently being built as an adjunct to Karma that will give us the ability to kind of create and manage links between the collections a little bit easier. After that, a big goal, and this is part of the project that's kind of nearest and dearest to me, is kind of making sure that what we're doing here is repeatable. We're in the process of working through these things, going down the paths that don't really work and backing up and kind of figuring out the best way to go about this. So really the end result is of all of this is going to be kind of this set of best practices, at least as far as we're concerned, and kind of to allow other museums or institutions that want to kind of adopt this to kind of jump ahead in the process and kind of get a running start based on what we've done. Also to continue to develop open source tools that can, again, be used by other institutions. And then to publish the data and the tools using open licensing where possible. Like was just being mentioned a minute ago, that gets into a whole world of discussions and things to figure out that we're just now kind of dipping our toes into. So, okay.
Hello, my name is Kate Blanche. I am the systems manager for data and digital resources at the Walters Art Museum in Baltimore, Maryland. We are an AAC participant, and I'm just going to start our story here by just going over some of the motivations for our participation. We had some new content. We had recently digitized our American art collection, so it coincided with the formation of the AAC. We are always looking for opportunities to elevate lesser known collection strengths. We are not particularly known for our American art collection, but it was the contemporary art of our founder, William Walters' time. So we have a small but pretty interesting collection of American art. And thirdly, leveraging collective energy and educational resources. Obviously, that is the primary reason for wanting to join 12 other partner institutions to learn about kind of a high learning curve technology. So collective energy and educational resources mean a couple things to us, and we've learned several things through it. Experimental development, trying new techniques, exploring new technologies, creatively extending the use of existing content. I really want to stress that because we are always looking for ways to activate existing content, to creatively repurpose it, especially in ways that may be more mainstream or more cutting edge in the technology sphere. Experimental development in a low risk environment is also incredibly important. It is simply not easy to get institutional buy-in for experimental learning-based projects when our internal staff time and resources and hardware and software is just completely maxed out. I don't think I'm probably alone in saying that. Museums really need to be able to implement new technologies and methods as they enter the digital web-driven world to stay vital. That's something we really recognize. However, I will be frank and say that if our institution had to write a check or contribute dollars to this project, we would not have been able to participate. So therein lies the irony. Another factor fostering this low-risk environment is the collaborative aspect, bringing together partner institutions a diverse group of institutions really does help to lend credibility to kind of a bleeding edge technology when talking to upper level management or people that just aren't, you know, on the ground doing this kind of work. Deep dive into technology with a diverse group of institutions. Go back. I just want to highlight the deep diving into technology with institutions who have both similar and different challenges. This is an incredible way to foolproof your own digital strategy or project approach or implementation methodologies. And also, not to be underrated, it is incredibly important to boost our confidence. When you are able to get peer support, tech support, support in how to talk to partners or managers, and also to give support to other institutions, I think that's a great learning model, and it's a great way to boost confidence. When you are trying to do new things that are particularly have a high learning curve, you know, it can be a pretty lonely landscape out there. So the third point I just want to touch on is, you know, being able to connect with humanities and technology experts who have been assembled by other humanities and technology experts is an amazing opportunity. You know, we are somewhat of a low visibility museum. I don't mean that in a self-deprecating way. I just mean, you know, our brand and, you know, our scale is not that huge. And it's not that those experts would, you know, ignore us or not cooperate if we needed information or support. It's just that I am not even sure I would know who to ask or the right questions to ask or what order to ask them in. So to have a team like this assembled for this purpose has been particularly a great factor in participating. So we'll go next. This is just a great slide. Sarah Snyder at the Smithsonian American Art Museum is one of the primary organizers of this project, and this is a great quote, and it really expresses candidly how I think a lot of the AAC participating institutions feel about linked data and about this project. It is not the easiest starting point for museums. It is just not. It's, you know, it's just not there's not a low bar set for entering into it. You know, the closer you get to publishing your data in RDF or linked data, strangely, the more complicated it gets. This has to be a linear, supported process for all the institutions. I mean, we mastered XML and then standard ontologies, but then there's Sparkle and XSLT and, you know, the URI mind meld that I'm still trying to recover from. It's a very multifaceted process, and that being said, you know, museums have always, in earnest, just wanted to connect better with each other. I think that's one of our primary goals or elements of all our mission statements. We really want to do a better job at connecting our collections, and we really do believe that it could strengthen the audience experience in ways we haven't seen if we could just bridge those overlaps between our collections. So the knowledge outcomes from the planning phase of our project, obviously we're trying to personalize what we've learned, bring it home, use it to apply to all our data, not just our American art collection. Evaluating and working with our own data. I'm a little biased because I am a data person, so I will bring that angle to it, but you know, being able to highlight the strengths of our data we could turn our back on bad data we didn't want to work with. We can experiment with new data to tell new stories. The AAC had really broad submission requirements for the kinds of data that you could contribute and the record set amounts. And I think it really allowed all the partner institutions to evaluate our own data sets in a way that furthered our own goals. Using ontologies like the CDOC CRM and learning how to model or map data to an ontology, thereby creating structured data, has been easier to understand in a context where there is an end point, there is a framework, there is a finish line, there's something we're trying to accomplish. You take, for example, a field of provenance data. So I have tried for years to map our data to a standard ontology, and I foiled around with it and haven't really come up with much. But when it was in this educational framework of taking elements out of data, isolating them, activating them. Take, for example, the provenance field has names, dates, locations in it, geographical locations. Learning that we want to structure our data so that those names and dates and geographical locations can be, linked to other places where they appear on the web. Those names, dates, and geographical locations undoubtedly repeat. Actually having a practical application for linked data, or even just creating structured data that can support linking, has been awesome. It really has helped create kind of a data strategic plan for us. I mean, I never really had a way to figure out where there were gaps in what we were capturing and the way we were cataloging. So there has been a lot to take home from this planning phase. And the last slide are tangible outcomes. We did map our data, not all of it by any means, but we mapped some of it to the CDOC CRM. We can go to the next point. This was my big coup for the last several months. I've figured out a way to get structured XML out of TMS through SQL. I'm super jazzed about that. I mean, I think what everyone needs to understand, what I didn't know going in, is that you have to provide data that's going to support RDF. You can't just take a provenance field filled with text and think that it's going to be truly active to its greatest potential. You have to structure your data so that it works to this new framework. There's definitely tools to help you do that, but you got to start somewhere. So generating structured data has been a great exercise for us, and what I will call opportunity farming. When you have structured data and you are working collaboratively, other things kind of pop up. We are going to do a pilot IIIF project to try to support the data that we're going to publish as part of the American Art Collaborative. Honestly, I would not have had the confidence or connections to really do that without working as part of this collaborative. I mean, I'm a little bit in over my head. I don't know how to administer an Ubuntu server, and I've never streamed images on the web, and I'm new at JPEG 2000, so it's there's a lot. I mean, but I think all in all, it's just been very positive. That's the happy story.
On that positive note, questions from the audience, please.
You said you had 38 case studies. I'm wondering who that came from. Who are you researching? Who's planning this stuff?
So where did the 38 case studies come from?
Apologies, I may have said case studies. They're use cases that were generated by the partners after that period of learning, and when we came together for the 2 days, and there was a lot of ideation and creative exercises that generated use cases specific to the participants' interests and needs and how they saw themselves reflected in the potential of the linked data for use of American art. Apologies if that was unclear.
So beyond the use cases, are you interested in case studies?
Absolutely. I mean, so and just to be clear, the partners, it includes, this is a project that has been pretty squarely targeted at scholars. This is for scholarly use. And so clearly there's the opportunity to broaden that and say, all right, how would public audiences or educators or the general public find some utility in this? But this project is squarely focused on the curators, the educators, the archivists who are participants as partners. Yes, absolutely.
So the Mellon report on authorities, if we can pass that around after.
Absolutely.
I was interested a little bit in terms of, if just a super quick discussion of the terms around the data, whether or not the institutions are comfortable at this point releasing text under certain sort of models, or whether or not they get hung up around images, or where are the major roadblocks at this point when dealing with a project like this?
Images, images, images.
Okay.
I've had anecdotal conversations or heard folks talking about the data. That's definitely not the heart of the issue where license is concerned. That seems to be more a discussion of what license are we going to release it under, what makes sense. Is CC or CC by whatever. The guidance that's coming from ISI and others is sort of the general purpose that you want to be as liberal as you think you can be, and ensure that you're not going to try to walk that back ever and become more stringent. So choose carefully. You can always become more liberal later and change the license, but don't walk it back.
And does that depend highly on the kinds of fields that you decided were crucial for inclusion in the American Art Collaborative? I'm thinking there's always a couple of special fields that the curators would never like anyone to see.
That's absolutely right. And so whether it's evaluation of works of art or certain conservation-related information, or even just anonymous donors, particularly around constituents, the names of people who donated art, or those kinds of things. Those kinds of controls tend to be in the collection management system, and so in the mapping you can model that and say and sort of respect and make as part of the mapping a respect of the cloaking that's going on and the alternative names that are used for anonymous donors and so forth.
I also want to add to that working with the guys from the folks from ISI at University of Southern California, I mean, they kept saying just raw data now. We don't care if you're gonna just omit 5 fields. If it's gonna cause headaches at your museum, just leave it out. Like, let's just get data out there. That's why I appreciated so much. I actually was in the camp of, everyone should at least submit these 5 fields so we all match across the whole consortium. And, that was not the best approach. The best approach is just let people submit what they can reasonably submit without having to resolve all these like copyright issues or, sensitive information issues. Just omit it. If it's not your strength, if you're uncomfortable with it, just leave it off, but just give us something.
And then maybe also what tools have been most useful across all the institutions in terms of getting data out of your CMSs and then into something that could work here.
That process has just begun, and so there are a couple, 2 or 3 of the group, the participants who are actively working with ISI to do that, and I'm afraid I don't have any specifics.
Yeah.
The ISI toolkit is a standard, so Karma, the mapping tool, which is very flexible. It can take almost any kind of data you want to throw at it, CSV, whatever. So the challenge or the effort is squarely placed on the shoulders of the institutions who may or may not already have mechanisms in place or infrastructure that's already exporting data either for publication to the web or whatever. And so some of them are starting from scratch, others have a head start.
I think there's another question, yeah?
How are you dealing with the problem of too much data, of contradictions between institutions about the same pieces of information?
So how do you deal with contradictions in large data sets?
Yeah, I think if I'm reading the question correctly, that's related to the harmonization reconciliation problem. So you're going to get to a point where someone says, I'm sorry, this isn't an American art example, but is it Circle of Rembrandt or is it Rembrandt? And you might have reasonable disagreement between two institutions who are holding two versions of a print by Rembrandt or not Rembrandt. And so that's where the authorities don't help you much. And there's handwork involved for how you're going to resolve the linking between those two. Is it just a same as? Well, there might be some reasonable disagreement amongst the scholars about whether that's a really appropriate way to provide that level of linking between those two entities. So it's a good question, and it'll be dealt with on a case-by-case basis. This is something that ISI has been through before, and so they've warned everybody, this is why you need the curator and the technologist sitting at the table while you're doing this mapping, because and the linking. You're going to run into these problems again and again.
So please thank all the panelists for their contribution today. Well done, guys. It was pretty smooth.
Thank you very much.
There was plenty of